At 32, I felt like I had my life together. My interior design career in the city was thriving. I had a loving boyfriend named Daniel and a close circle of friends. But behind the facade of success, my family was quietly falling apart. My younger sister Lily was 30 and about to marry her fiancé Mark. They were a fantastic couple, always the life of the party. Planning her wedding should have been a joyous occasion, but the shadow of our father's struggles loomed over everything. Dad, at 60, was battling alcoholism and making reckless decisions, especially after his divorce from our mom years ago. Watching him spiral was agonizing, but I tried to remain strong for Lily's sake. "Are you sure Dad's going to be okay?" Lily asked one evening, her voice laced with worry as we finalized wedding details. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I hope so, Lily. He promised he'd stay sober for your big day." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Dad's promises were as fragile as his sobriety. And then there was Cassandra, his new girlfriend. From the moment I met her, something felt off. She was charming on the surface, but there was a coldness in her eyes that sent shivers down my spine. "Have you noticed how Cassandra's always whispering in Dad's ear?" I confided in my best friend Sarah over coffee. Sarah nodded. "She's always around him, like she's controlling him." "I'm starting to think she's taking advantage of him," I admitted, a knot forming in my stomach. "I need to find out more about her." Balancing wedding preparations with my growing concerns about Dad and Cassandra was exhausting. Thankfully, Daniel was incredibly supportive. "You're doing an amazing job, Claire," he'd say, pulling me close. "Don't let this family drama get to you." His words were a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. But as the wedding day approached, the tension in our family grew. Lily and Mark wanted everything to be perfect, but Dad's unpredictable behavior threatened to overshadow their happiness, and Cassandra's influence over him seemed to tighten with each passing day. One afternoon, while we were choosing floral arrangements, Lily voiced her fears again. "Do you really think Dad will stay sober?" I forced a reassuring smile. "I do. He wants to be there for you, Lily." But doubt gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Cassandra was up to something, and I was determined to protect my family, no matter the cost. My gut screamed that something was wrong. I couldn't ignore it. Late nights were spent scouring social media, making discreet calls to Dad's old friends, digging for any information about Cassandra. What I uncovered was unsettling, to say the least. Her past was shrouded in inconsistencies and half-truths. "Sarah, you need to see this," I urged one evening, spreading out the documents I'd gathered on my coffee table. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. "This is serious, Claire. We need to be careful." Her support fueled my determination. Sleepless nights and constant worry became my new normal, but I couldn't let anything ruin Lily's special day. Finally, the big day arrived. The venue was stunning. Lily looked radiant in her wedding dress, but my anxiety was through the roof. As guests began to arrive, I kept a close eye on Dad and Cassandra. Everything seemed calm, but I couldn't relax. "Everything okay, Claire?" Daniel asked, noticing my tension. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just a bit nervous, you know how it is." As the ceremony proceeded, a glimmer of hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, things would be okay, but that hope was fragile, hanging by a thread. After the vows were exchanged, we moved to the reception. The room buzzed with laughter and joy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. I watched Dad mingle with the guests, his presence still a source of unease. Lily caught my eye and gave me a reassuring smile. "See? Everything's perfect." I wanted to believe her, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Cassandra's eyes darted around the room, her smile never reaching them. My heart raced as I wondered what she was planning, and then it happened. Dad started drinking again. His laughter grew louder, his movements more erratic. Cassandra hovered nearby, her influence over him undeniable. A surge of anger and fear washed over me. "Claire, maybe you should get some fresh air," Daniel suggested gently. I nodded, desperate to escape the suffocating tension. "Yeah, I think I need a break." As I walked away, my mind raced. I had to do something to protect Lily and myself. The calm was just a facade. A storm was brewing, and I had no idea how it would unfold. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed. But at that moment, all I could do was cling to hope and try to keep everything from falling apart. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, a welcome contrast to the stifling tension inside. I could still feel Cassandra's eyes on me, burning with resentment. "You're ruining everything, Claire," she hissed, her voice like venom cutting through the cheerful music. "Stay out of our lives." I stood my ground, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm protecting Lily from your manipulation." Her composure cracked. "You think you can control us? You're just a meddling sister." Suddenly she lunged, grabbing my arms and slapping me hard across the face. The sharp sting sent shockwaves through me. The room, which had been buzzing with conversation moments before, fell silent. I stumbled back, the world tilting around me. Guests gasped, their whispers filling the sudden void like a swarm of confused bees. Daniel was instantly by my side, his arm around me, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern. I nodded, though my face throbbed and my ears rang. "I think so," I managed, my voice shaky. Lily rushed over, her eyes wide with fear. "Claire, what happened? Are you hurt?" Before I could answer, the murmurs around us intensified. People were staring, pointing, some even looking accusingly at Cassandra. John, despite his drunken state, looked genuinely distressed. He tried to step forward, but Cassandra held him back, her expression icy. "Let's get some fresh air," I said, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere. Daniel nodded and guided me towards the exit, away from the prying eyes and hushed whispers. Outside, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "I can't believe she did that," I whispered to Daniel, the shock starting to wear off, replaced by a burning anger. He squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You did nothing wrong. Cassandra lost control." But inside, I felt shattered. The rest of the evening was a blur. Cassandra was escorted out by security, but the damage was done. The joyous atmosphere of the wedding was irrevocably tainted. As we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Back home, the reality of what had happened crashed down on us. Lily was devastated, blaming herself for not seeing the signs sooner. "I'm so sorry, Claire," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life." I hugged her tightly, trying to offer some comfort. "It's not your fault, Lily. We couldn't have known." John, meanwhile, was in denial. He kept insisting that Cassandra hadn't meant any harm, that I was overreacting. "She was just upset because things didn't go her way," he said stubbornly. Frustration surged through me. "Dad, she slapped me. That's not something you can just brush off." He shook his head, clearly struggling with his own demons. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Claire. Let's not ruin Lily's wedding over this." His refusal to acknowledge what had happened only deepened the emotional wounds. I realized then that I couldn't keep enabling his behavior. It was time to set boundaries, no matter how difficult. With Sarah's unwavering support, I decided to dig deeper into Cassandra's past. One evening we sat in my living room, surrounded by the information I had gathered. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a series of documents. "Cassandra has a history of fraud and assault, and these bank statements, they show unusual transfers between her accounts and Dad's." Sarah frowned, her eyes scanning the papers. "This is serious, Claire. If your father is involved, we need to handle this carefully." We spent hours piecing together the puzzle, uncovering connections that I never imagined. It became clear that Cassandra wasn't just a problematic girlfriend. She was using my father for her own gain. The more we found, the more convinced I became that exposing this was the only way to protect Lily and myself. One night, Sarah and I decided to confront John with the evidence. His reaction was everything I feared. He became angry and defensive, denying any wrongdoing and accusing me of betrayal. "How dare you accuse me of this?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "Cassandra is good for me. She's the only one who understands me." But I stood my ground. "Dad, you're involved in her schemes." "We have proof. This ends now." His face twisted with rage and sorrow. "You're ruining my life, Claire. You're just like everyone else." In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. For the sake of my sister and myself, I had to cut ties with him. It was the hardest decision I ever made, but I couldn't let his destructive behavior continue to harm us. As I walked away from that confrontation, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew I was making the right choice. With Sarah by my side, I felt stronger and more determined than ever to uncover the truth and rebuild my life away from the chaos. Months passed since that devastating wedding night. The tension in my home had eased, but the scars remained. Cutting ties with Dad was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but with Sarah's unwavering support, I felt stronger and more determined than ever to uncover the full extent of Cassandra's deceit. One evening, Sarah and I sat in my living room, surrounded by stacks of documents and photographs. "We need to present this to the authorities," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Cassandra's crimes and Dad's involvement are too serious to ignore." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right. But how do we approach this without putting ourselves in danger?" Sarah looked thoughtful. "We need to be meticulous, gather all the evidence, and find a reliable lawyer who can help us navigate this." Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly. We compiled financial records, recorded conversations, and even found witness statements from some of Dad's old acquaintances who were aware of Cassandra's manipulative tactics. It was exhausting, but each piece of evidence brought us closer to the truth. One afternoon, as we were finalizing our case, I received a call from Daniel. "Claire, I've been thinking," he began, his voice filled with concern. "Maybe it's time we go to the police. This can't keep going on." I hesitated for a moment before responding. "I agree, Daniel. Let's set up a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow." The next day, Sarah, Daniel, and I met with a compassionate lawyer named Rebecca Thompson. She listened intently as we laid out our findings. "This is substantial evidence," Rebecca assured us. "We can file a report and move forward with pressing charges against Cassandra. As for your father, we'll need to present the proof of his involvement as well." Feeling a mix of relief and anxiety, I knew we were taking the right steps. The legal process would be long and challenging, but it was necessary to protect ourselves and others from Cassandra's influence. As the weeks turned into months, the case gained momentum. Cassandra was arrested and charged with fraud and assault, while evidence against Dad's complicity in her schemes began to surface. The community was shocked, and the media quickly picked up the story, turning our quiet lives into a public spectacle. Through it all, my career flourished. My dedication and resilience caught the attention of my superiors, and I was promoted to senior interior designer. The recognition was gratifying, but my true strength came from the support of those closest to me: Lily, Mark, Daniel, and Sarah. One evening, after a long day at work, I sat down with Lily and Mark for dinner. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," Lily said, raising her glass. "You've handled everything with such grace." Mark nodded in agreement. "You're an inspiration to us all." Their words warmed my heart, reminding me of the importance of chosen family. Despite the chaos and betrayal, we had formed an unbreakable bond, stronger than ever before. As Cassandra's trial approached, the tension was palpable. The courtroom was packed, every detail of her manipulative actions and Dad's involvement laid bare for all to see. Rebecca, our lawyer, presented our evidence with precision, and the truth couldn't be denied. During the trial, I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sense of justice being served. When the verdict was announced, it was clear that Cassandra's reign of manipulation was over. She was sentenced to several years in prison for her crimes. But the most shocking revelation came when additional evidence revealed Dad's deeper involvement, leading to his own downfall. Watching him lose everything was heartbreaking, but it was a necessary step for both of us to heal. Through therapy, I began to process the trauma and betrayal. Dr. Chun, my therapist, helped me navigate the complex emotions that came with cutting ties and exposing my father's actions. "It's okay to feel conflicted," she reminded me during one session. "You've been through a lot, and healing takes time." With each passing day, I felt lighter, more at peace. My bond with Lily grew even stronger, and Daniel and Sarah remained my pillars of support. We celebrated small victories together, like Lily and Mark renewing their vows in an intimate backyard ceremony, symbolizing new beginnings and the strength of our chosen family. As the trial concluded, I stood up to deliver my victim impact statement. My voice trembled, but I spoke with conviction. "The scars from that night run deep, but they've made me stronger. I am not a victim, but a survivor." Surrounded by Lily, Mark, Daniel, and Sarah, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The past year had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges, but it had also been a journey of resilience and healing. I looked around the room, seeing the faces of those who had stood by me through hell and back, and realized that true family isn't just about blood, it's about loyalty, love, and mutual respect. As I finished my statement, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The chapter of betrayal was closing, and a new one was beginning, filled with hope, gratitude, and the promise of a brighter future. That evening, we gathered at my favorite restaurant to celebrate not only my recent promotion at work, but our collective resilience. "To the strongest people I know," Sarah toasted, her eyes shining with pride. I smiled, clinking glasses with my family. "To all of us. We've proven that family isn't just about blood, it's about the loyalty and love we choose to share." As we laughed and shared stories, I felt a profound sense of hope and gratitude. The past year had been a nightmare, but it had also been a gift. It taught me about my own strength, the importance of setting boundaries, and the beauty of finding a family built on genuine love and support. Sitting there, surrounded by those who mattered most, I knew that this was my happy ending. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and beautiful in its own way. As I looked toward the future, I felt nothing but hope and excitement for the life I was building, a life filled with love, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. Story 2. Azra is my name. For nearly as long as I've been Axel's wife, I've been a doctor. Our 30 years together have been full of both difficult and joyful times, yet it feels like the time rushed by in the blink of an eye. Particularly while our kids Leander and Soren were little, our large, cozy house was constantly a hive of activity. Despite their extreme differences, Leander and Soren each contributed laughter and delight to our lives in their own unique ways. As doctors, Axel and I have put in a lot of effort over the years to provide a comfortable life for our family. In order to generate a little extra cash, we even succeeded in purchasing a few apartments and renting them out. Life appeared to be going well for a while. Then one day, Axel came home looking pale and serious, more serious than I'd ever seen him. With a heavy sigh, he put his medical bag down beside the entrance and said, "Azra, we need to talk." A shiver went through me. He stared directly into my eyes and informed me I got some tests done last week. According to the results, it's cancer. Overwhelming hospital appointments, procedures, hours, and waiting rooms characterized the months that followed. Everything turned into a haze. Despite Axel's valiant efforts, the disease proved merciless. Observing him, it was devastating to watch the toughest guy I knew deteriorate daily. I could not have been prepared for the anguish of witnessing his decline by all the medical expertise in the world. He grabbed my hand tightly while we sat in the living room one evening. "If things don't go as planned, Azra," he added softly, "with the lads, please take care of everything. The will is all arranged, and you'll be well financially." He left shortly after that talk. The funeral was a solemn, low-key affair. Colleagues, friends, and family traveled from far and wide to bid farewell, but it was the stillness in the house following that was hardest to take. His possessions remained in their customary locations, as though he might return at any time. A few days after the funeral, I was in the kitchen trying to determine what to do with all the remaining food. When Leander came storming in, His face was filled with worry and anger. He was closely followed by Soren, who appeared to prefer being somewhere else. Leander firmly remarked, "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will." Getting to the point quickly. I set down the plastic wrap I was holding and inhaled deeply, as I always do. I said, "Yes, I know. Your father wanted to be sure I could handle things, so he left everything to me." Leander. His cheeks flushed with annoyance. "But what about Soren and me?" he asked, slamming his fist against the counter. "Where?" "His sons. It's not fair that we get nothing." Soren attempted to calm him down, stepping in with a quiet voice. "Let's take our time, Leander. We can resolve this amicably, and Mom is still in mourning." "It's easy for you to say you're not worried about the future like I am," Leander mumbled, giving him a quick glance. I felt the weight of their gazes as I leaned against the counter. "Your father and I built this life together, and he trusted me to take care of everything. But, Leander, I get what you're saying. I don't want to leave you out. Therefore, what are we to do?" Leander crossed his arms and commanded, "Simply hold off on giving us our part until you believe it is appropriate." "Leander, watch your tone," I said. "My patience." "Well, it's getting close to hour. You still call me Mum." Raising his hands as though to maintain harmony, Soren moved in between us. "Both of you, please." "Mom, this isn't helping. Perhaps we might find a medium ground." I rubbed my temples and nodded slowly as I considered it. "All right. This is my thought. Your father and I made an investment in downtown apartments. You own them. Each of you takes one. You may rent them out or live there. It is up to you to choose them." Leander's eyes brightened, but before he could say anything, I raised my hand. "I'll also offer each of you $310,000 from the savings to help with whatever you need." As he considered the statistics and other factors, Leander chewed his lip. I answered, "The house, the money that stays with me for now. As your father desired, it will come to you after I'm gone." I told Leander that he appeared to want to continue the argument, but Soren pushed him and suggested that we consider this. "It's a reasonable beginning. Our mother isn't abandoning us." At last, Leander gave a nod. He still appeared dissatisfied, though. "All right, but Mother, I want this in writing. No more surprises." "Naturally," I concurred. "We'll thoroughly document everything." As they walked out of the kitchen, Soren muttered to Leander, and I heard it. "Will you give her a break? She's giving it her all." I couldn't hear Leander muttering something under his breath, and to be honest, I didn't want to find out. I pondered whether Axel was observing us and what he would think of my handling of everything while I was doing the dishes. Time would tell, but I thought I was making the right decisions. Time, too. You don't always have that hard thing on your side. Several days later, on a bright afternoon, one of those infrequently warm days when everything seems to be fine, when Leander first met me, he brought his girlfriend Talia over. Even though they had just recently begun dating, Leander was obviously in love. It was evident in the way he fussed over her, which was completely out of character for him when they first entered. Talia immediately had this confident, even aggressive air about her, like she owned the area. With hardly a greeting, she entered my living room while dressed up. Her gaze swept over the furnishings and decor in her immediate surroundings. Without waiting for an invitation, she sat down and flipped her hair back, saying, "Nice place you have here." Leander sat next to her, smiling foolishly. I faked a grin, attempting to host well. "Thank you, Talia. Is there anything I can get you? Coffee? Tea? Coffee sounds delicious." After responding, she turned to face Leander. "Make sure it's black, darling. No sugar." Leander gave me a nod and went to the kitchen, leaving me in my living room by myself with her, feeling strangely like the visitor. It was awkwardly quiet until she eventually said something. "Leander informs me that you have a good amount of money." As she spoke, she continued to look about at the furnishings. "You know, I'm used to a particular standard. That's what my parents ensured. I'm glad to hear that." Unsure of what else to say, I answered. After bringing the coffee back, Leander gave Talia her cup. She sipped. She wrinkled her nose a little. "It's okay," she whispered. Then she went on. "In any case, We have been discussing our future together. You know, planning ahead. That's smart, I answered, looking at Leander in the hopes that he might hint to the direction of the conversation. Talia put down her cup and gave me a direct look. In relation to planning, we have been considering the wedding. I'm looking for something unique. Leander has most likely already informed you. Leander nodded encouragingly as she looked at him. Although it's a little pricey, I discovered the ideal location for the rehearsal dinner. It is around $40,000. My coffee almost suffocated me. The rehearsal supper alone cost $40,000. Leander instantly stepped in. Talia cares about it, Mom. We want to get things off to a good start. With a tempest building inside of me, I set down my cup. You see, Talia, that's a lot of money for only one supper. Here, we must use common sense. Talia's expression grew stern. Reasonable. You have the resources, Leander says. I fail to understand why we should make a compromise on something so crucial. Leander was nodding in agreement with her, but I could tell that he was unsure. He realized in his heart that this was a lot to ask. I'm completely in favor of festivities, I said, maintaining a steady tone. However, I can't rationalize spending $40,000 on a single supper. Talia's chair scraped noisily across the floor as she jerked to her feet. Asra, I'm not accustomed to lowering my expectations. I let Leander know that I had certain expectations on his lifestyle. Leander made an effort to diffuse the situation. We might be able to compromise, Mom. When it comes to spending $40,000 on dinner, there is no compromise. Leander. That's the end of it. With my patience finally wearing thin, I stated forcefully. Talia glared at me and reached for her handbag. All right, if that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to rethink certain things. Then she and Leander left, with Leander running after her. After they departed, I sat there in disbelief at what had transpired. The nerve of that chick coming into my home, sipping my coffee, and advising me how to spend my money. It was like being slapped across the face. An unexpected wake-up call. I wasn't prepared for what transpired a few days later. Leander and Talia chose to return to my house while I was out conducting errands at the grocery store. By the time I arrived home, I could sense the tension in the air even before going inside. They were seated in the living room, and Soren was attempting to carry on a conversation, but it was clear that things were uncomfortable. I wanted to turn around and go, but I had to remember that here was my home. I inhaled deeply, mustered the bravery, and entered. As soon as I set down my grocery bags, Talia, dressed as normal, came up and gave me a list. Azra, after much consideration, this is what we have settled on for the wedding presents. I hope you find this list easier to manage. With confidence, she said. To my surprise, the list seemed reasonable when I quickly looked at it. A lovely set of china, a few kitchen appliances, and a few pieces of furniture were included. To be honest, I was relieved. I nodded and said, "This looks very reasonable. These are excellent selections in my opinion." Leander gave Talia a hopeful glance, as though he believed she had finally made a compromise. However, Talia's expression abruptly shifted, and she let out a gasp. She grabbed the book out of my hands and shouted, "Oh no, this isn't the right list." She took another piece of paper out of her handbag. "Here's the real list," she remarked, grinning slightly as she handed it over. The original list wasn't like this one at all. I scanned it with a sinking heart. It contained diamond jewelry, an elite holiday, a fancy automobile, and an apartment. My mouth fell open. Could this be a joke? In the hopes that I had misinterpreted, I inquired. Talia didn't even bat an eyelid. Not a joke. Azra, we anticipate receiving these presents. For our wedding, only the best will do. I waited for Leander to speak as I glanced at him. To show me or to protest? He simply remained there staring between us, even if he disagreed with this ridiculous list. Clearly conflicted, but remaining silent. At last, I was unable to contain myself. Why are you allowing her to do this, Leander? This is irrational, you know? Talia interrupted Leander before he could reply. She spoke louder. You're not worried about this, Azra. All you have to do is pay up and remain silent. Soren, who had been sitting calmly, got up abruptly. His expression was grave. That's sufficient. Talia, You won't speak to our mother in that manner. You are completely out of place in her home. You must go now." As she and Leander packed their belongings and left, Talia's cheeks flushed with rage. She whispered to herself, "This is absurd. We will keep this in mind." The door behind them then slammed. I slumped into a chair, the situation's weight bearing down on me. Sitting next to me, Soren wrapped a reassuring arm across my shoulders. "Mom, we'll work this out. However, you must resist their pressure to provide more than you are capable of or ought to. It is incorrect." Of course, he was correct. However, I couldn't help but worry about Leander while I sat there with my kid. What caused things to spiral out of control? How was he blind to the damage this was causing to our family? Unspoken anxieties and fears for the future weighed heavily on the room's quiet. At that moment, I understood that this battle was far from done, and that things would only grow more difficult from here on out. Leander called me nonstop in the weeks that followed. Every call was harder than the one before it. His voice was frenetic, at times desperate. "You don't get it, Mom. Next to the Tullius family is myself, Caleb," he would dispute. He spoke in a weak, stressed-out voice. "The money is yours. Why are you unable to just assist me?" I had a knot in my gut as I sat at the kitchen table with a phone to my ear. I told Leander it wasn't about the money. Living within your limits is important because Leah has unrealistic expectations that you can't meet without running the danger of incurring significant debt. His fury poured forth as he mocked. "What are your knowledge on it? I will not live a life of poverty. Now I require more from the inheritance. What you've given is insufficient." "Leander," I firmly responded, "up to $125,000, I've volunteered to pay half of the wedding expenses, and to present you with a gift of $5,000. That's really giving already, but you must agree with me on everything. No surprises." The person on the opposite end of the queue paused, then laughed sharply and bitterly. "That's nothing," he answered coldly. "You're simply being frugal. $1 million is sitting there in your possession. What's causing you to wait for me? Leander?" His tone was abrasive and angry. My patience almost gone, I said, "Leander, it's not just about the money. It's about refusing to back this impractical fantasy. That will only cause you pain." I had to keep the phone away from my ear because he was shouting so loudly. "This is not necessary for me. I'll take care of it my way. I'll forget you." After saying that, he ended the call. Leander didn't communicate for months. In the hopes that he may see reason, I attempt to remain occupied with my routines. But right when I was beginning to feel somewhat at ease, the telephone rang. One afternoon, Callista Ajara, my sister-in-law, was the one. "I believed you ought to be aware." Her voice was uncertain. "Be cautious. All of the wedding guests are being flown to Bermuda by Leander. You'll have to find your own way there," he remarked, selling his flat to pay for it. He informed everyone that you had no want to assist. With despair and rage churning in my heart, I hung up. How could he have been so careless and reckless? Before I had time to comprehend what I had just heard, Soren entered the room with a stern expression. "I need to tell you something, Mom." As he handed me a little audio recorder, he said, "While they were in the living room, I captured their chat. I hit play with a shaking hand. The kitchen echoed with Leander and Talia's voices. Your mother is only a shady old lady with a large fortune," Talia said in a chilly tone. "After extracting as much as possible from her, we must cut her off." Leonidas's voice, which sounded as icy, followed. "Talia, do whatever it takes. I will not allow her to rule us. I'll throw her out in her pants if necessary." Hearing my own son talk negatively about me was more than I could take, so I shut off the recorder while my hands were shaking. As I tried to comprehend this treachery, the room whirled. It wasn't easy to decide to go to Bermuda, but I knew I had to go with Soren by my side. When we landed and arrived at the wedding location, we were both anxious but resolved to face whatever lay ahead. I couldn't believe how extravagant it was. Every surface was covered with flowers. Soft music was playing in the background as lights were strung up across the sky like stars. Although everything was lovely, it seemed excessive. The purpose of a spectacle was not to rejoice but to impress. I saw Leander and Talia interacting with others as soon as we entered. They seemed like the ideal pair. All laughing and grins. Seeing my youngster engrossed in this illusion broke my heart. I moved in their direction, but Talia saw us before I could approach. The expression of sheer annoyance took the place of her grin. She clicked fiercely on the stone walkway as she marched over her high heels. "You're not supposed to be here." She stopped inches from me and snarled. She raised her voice loud enough to draw attention. "You are not welcome on my day." Before I could say anything, I was in a state of shock and unable to react. Overhearing, her parents approached. Her tall, solemn-looking father was the first to speak. "That's not how you address a visitor, Talia." In particular, to his mother, Leander. His tone was forceful, making Talia's cheeks grow scarlet with humiliation. Her mother turned to me and smiled warmly, seeming just as sad. "Please accompany us, Azra. Let's locate a seat for you." They led us to a table on the venue's edge. Tucked aside with no appropriate surroundings or decorating, it was clear that the location was an afterthought. Shortly later, the event began with hollow speeches, given the tension hanging in the air. The microphone was then given to me without warning. Despite my trembling legs, I rose up after studying myself. Breathing deeply, to wish my son and his new bride a bright future, I came here today. My heart was pounding, but I started out with a firm voice. However, I also believe in ethics and honesty, which have been sorely lacking in the events that have led up to this point. Talia's eyes narrowed in rage as her face turned from pink to scarlet. Someone begged me for money. I kept going in amounts that no sane person could justify time and time again. I faced the fear of being cut off from my son, my potential grandkids, and my family when I failed to accept these demands. Seeing how agitated I was, I continued Soren even though my voice broke a little, moved in closer, and rested a reassuring hand on my shoulder. I had the strength to continue because of him. I nodded slightly to Sean before hitting play on the tape. As she described how they would attempt to obtain more money from me, Talia's icy and cunning voice dominated the room. Leonidas's voice interrupted, concurring with her strategy, and even stating that he would be prepared to abandon me for his bride's sake. The audience awoke, muttering in surprise and displeasure. There was a profound and dense quiet after I cut off the recording. "I've given my son $25,000 and a flat." My voice was steady as I spoke. However, it was never sufficient. I'm stating unequivocally today that I will not be intimidated or treated like an ATM. Leander and Talia are being disowned by me. Although I wish them well, I have decided to cut myself off from their life as of right now. The response came instantly. Talia let out a piercing scream, her voice loud and fierce. "My wedding has been wrecked by you. After all that transpired, I curse you." Returning home was a bittersweet experience. However, in the silence that ensued, I made an unexpected choice. I resigned from my position. As a doctor, I had been healing people for years. However, it was now time for me to recover and put my life back together after it had been upended. Soren, bless his heart, had recently graduated from college and was full of ideas and enthusiasm with $27,000 I had given him. Soren started a tattoo parlor of his own. It wasn't just any tattoo parlor, either. It soon developed into a location where flesh and art coexisted in exquisite ways. Soren gave his all to his effort, and it was rewarded. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon his name was on everyone's lips in the local community. Soon, he was expanding his business and building a network of tattoo parlors that attracted a lot of tattoo fans. Late into the night, I would watch him doodle. His commitment a strong contrast to the anarchy brother had chosen. "Soren, you're doing fantastic." During these quiet months, I would say that I feel a surge of pride in my chest. One afternoon, Leander came back. When he arrived at my door, he appeared to be a ghost of the driven individual he had previously been, with weary eyes and hunched shoulders. He didn't even wait for an offer to sit before saying, "Mom, I need to talk." In contrast to the authoritative tone I had become accustomed to, his voice seemed tired. I let out a sigh and gestured for him to go on. "Hey Leander, what is it? It's Talia. Her constant desire for more is driving me insane. There is never enough." His voice was desperate as he said, "She still doesn't think my second job is enough." Even though I could see how exhausted he was and his voice trembled, his sorrow was not enough to make the past go away. "And I told you, Leander." I spoke in a forceful yet kind tone. "I warned you that it was not sustainable to live that way with someone like her." His displeasure was evident as he wiped his face. "I am certain that you did, but I had an idea." His speech drifted off as if he realized he had no true reason. "What did you think?" I couldn't help but say it. "You would just want the money to show up." My tone was harsher than I meant. Years of built-up frustration made it hard to soften my remarks. "Look at your brother. He began with the same amount as you did, and succeeded without infringing on anyone else's rights." Leander bristled. His pride was still hurt. "Indeed, it's true that not everyone is like Soren. I have the right to keep the inheritance in mind, and I'll get it when you're gone." The final straw was that, "Leave now, Leander." I spoke in an icy, uncompromising tone. "And don't return. Not now. You made your own decision." His jaw tensed, and I briefly believed he was going to argue. However, he slammed the door behind him as he turned and left. After hearing the final portion of our conversation, Soren came downstairs as the quiet subsided. "Mom, are you all right?" "Gently," he inquired. I put my arms around him and nodded. "Thanks to you, I am now. Let's just concentrate on the life we can create and the good we can accomplish." He gave me a hug in return. He served as a reassuring reminder that not everything had been lost at that precise moment. I was aware that this journey was still worthwhile, in spite of the difficulties. The fact that we had each other was sufficient to keep going. Our home finally found a quiet, peaceful rhythm after the storm with Leander had passed. Soren introduced us to someone special during this serene period, when life at last felt at ease and content. She was all that Talia wasn't, and her name was Selene, sincere, modest, and compassionate. Their bond deepened as the weeks stretched into months, and they eventually declared their engagement. Their nuptials were the exact antithesis of Leonidas's lavish celebration. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony right in our backyard. We used homemade accents and flowers from the garden to decorate, surrounded by a select few family members and close friends. It was the ideal day. I drew Soren away during the reception. "My heart is full. You've selected a beautiful woman." My voice was full of emotion as I spoke. He gripped my hand and grinned, his eyes filled with warmth. He looked at me knowingly and said, "I learnt from the best." After that, life seemed to go by fast. I gave them the flat, and they sold it. Soren contributed part of their funds and bought a little, comfortable house just a few kilometers away. One lovely afternoon, as we were drinking tea in their new living room, Selene offered some excellent news. "Azra." With joy in her eyes, she declared, "We're expecting twins." I was so happy that I almost dropped my cup. "Twins? Oh my God! That's wonderful!" I cried out. Soren's pride glowed on his face. "We wanted you to be the first to know." "Mom, we're so happy!" I repeated twins, letting the words sink in as joy flooded me. Grandchild, kids, what a blessing. When I was so ready to start, it was a fresh chapter. As for Leander, news about him was uncommon. The last I heard, he had divorced Talia. He had to start again in another city because she had taken almost everything in the separation. It's anguish regardless of the harm he has committed. I wanted to know that he was hurting someplace as a result of his decisions. One evening, Soren sat next to me as I was browsing through old picture albums. He saw a photo of me and Leander from years ago. "Do you ever hear from him?" he asked quietly after a pause. I gave a headshake. "No. After everything, even if it pains me, I have to accept that he has chosen his own path." Soren wrapped me in his arm. "I still consider him a brother, Mom. Perhaps he'll change his mind." With a mixture of optimism and sadness, I nodded. "Perhaps," I said, even though I didn't think he would ever do it. But with those twins on the way, we had plenty to occupy us for the time being. Soren laughed. "Yes, you will soon be the busiest grandmother in the community." Despite the history, the sound of our laughter filled the room with warmth and love. Even with all of the errors and heartache, This moment with Soren seemed to be just right. We were moving forward with life, with fresh aspirations and expectations on the horizon. Story 3. After my parents went away, I inherited their gorgeous house, a huge estate valued at $135 million. This house wasn't merely a piece of property to me. It was jam-packed with memories, a place of joy and warmth where I had grown up. In the hopes that this would be the ideal location for us to start a family and create new memories, my husband Leif and I made the decision to move in. Together, we envisioned a future here with Leif, a dependable software developer who was 35 years old. In my dream, I would paint the walls, decorate the rooms, and eventually hear kids playing in the hallways. Everything seemed to be coming together, as if I were in a dream. However, that dream quickly turned into a nightmare. My inheritance had always seemed to be of interest to Leif's family. At first I brushed it off, believing they were simply glad for us. Family, in my opinion, was about sharing, and I was ready to lend a hand when necessary. However, their curiosity soon evolved into something darker and more disturbing. I was working on some drawings in the living room one tranquil afternoon when the silence was broken by loud, irate shouts. When I looked up, I saw my sister-in-law Ariel, brother-in-law Dorian, and Leif's mother, Leonora, barging in. They hadn't given a call, hadn't provided any warning. They simply rushed in. Their expressions were icy and tense. "Caitlin, we need to chat," Lyra announced sharply, her voice leaving no room for argument. "What's happening?" I asked, feeling a sudden sense of worry. "You must view certain materials we have for you." Ariel scoffed, tossing me a bundle of papers with a nasty smirk. I took them with a rising feeling of dread as I perused the materials. My heart fell. They were fake, but made to look like legal papers claiming ownership of my home. I looked up, my hands shaking as I tried to think of the right words. "What is this?" I insisted. My voice was shaking. "You cannot just claim this house as your own?" "Well, we can." Dorian crossed his arms in an arrogant reply. "These documents indicate that Leif's family currently owns this home. You must leave." I looked to Leif in the hopes that he would stand up for me, hoping he'd claim it was a misunderstanding. However, he stood with his arms folded and his face expressionless. He appeared to be a complete stranger. "Leif, please speak out," I begged, and as he turned aside and walked away, I felt my heart break. "It's better this way, Caitlin." Lyra spoke with a false sense of pity in her voice. "If we take the lead, you'll be happier. This enormous weight is not necessary for you." A surge of rage swept through me. "I call this place home," I yelled. "I'm not going anywhere. You can't take this away from me." Anger twisted Lyra's face. She came up abruptly and gave me a forceful slap across the face. Stunned and scarcely able to comprehend what had happened, I staggered back. Although my cheeks hurt, it was insignificant in comparison to the hurt of betrayal that was pulsing through me. "Will you simply allow her to speak to us in this manner?" Emboldened by Leah's hostility, she snapped at Leif, her visage full of disdain. Dorian started to gather my possessions, including my sketches and personal items, and tossed them out the door. "Mom, you heard! Leave now!" he shouted, his voice filled with cold satisfaction. As they threw my life out onto the street, I watched helplessly. My ambitions, my dreams, it was all being torn away. "Leif!" I screamed in the hopes that he would wake up. However, he said nothing, unaffected by my suffering. As I stepped outside, clutching a handful of my scattered items, I felt devastated, yet a flame inside me refused to die. Despite taking everything away from me, they managed to keep me intact. I resolved then and there that I would fight back. This day, I would make sure they regretted it. My story is this: a story of treachery, tenacity, and the quest to recover what I lost. I requested that the conflict be escalated. The violence of his family seemed to immobilize Leif as he stood still. More painful than any of the stern words or violent acts I was subjected to was his silence. My heartache and rage combined to form a painful insight. He wasn't going to protect me. He was already on their side. My voice broke through the confusion as I yelled, "Leave my house! You're not allowed to do this." Although my statements reverberated throughout the room, they simply appeared to strengthen their resolve. Lyra came closer, her eyes penetrating her presence, infusing the space with an uncomfortable tension. "You think you can keep all of this for yourself?" She gave a hiss. "We now own this. You are only a visitor in your own home." Her comments weighed heavily on me. I was losing control of this house, which was full of love and memories. I could feel the walls closing in, the air growing heavier as I struggled to breathe. The notion that I may lose everything, my house, my dreams, and perhaps my marriage, was devastating. At last, Leaf said something. His voice was weak and hardly audible. "This isn't worth it, Caitlin. Let's just talk about this later." "Discuss what?" I yelled, my voice rising with anger and rage. "You're allowing them to intimidate me in my own house." I felt like I was being swept away by the treachery. It seemed like my entire life was falling apart. Lyra suddenly grabbed my arm, her grasp harsh. I jumped away, fury erupting within me. "You dare not touch me!" I yelled, feeling the weight of their greed pushing down on me. I realized then that I had to defend myself. I was determined to fight back against their attempts to take everything away from me. "I will not give you this house," I declared, my voice full with indignation. "I won't go softly." Dorian laughed icily and mockingly. "Do you believe you can defeat us?" "Caitlin, you're alone here. We have Leaf with us." Tears pricked my eyes, but these were tears of frustration, not defeat. I surveyed the mess they had made, my strewn-about possessions, and my memories, which seemed meaningless. I wasn't prepared to give up, though. "I'm not alone," I said in a firm, determined voice. "The law is on my side. You can't simply come in here and grab what doesn't belong to you." Lyra's self-assured smile faltered for the first time. She took a tentative step back, and her controlling demeanor appeared to falter. "You honestly believe you can accomplish this?" she scoffed. "Caitlin, you'll regret this." But something within of me ignited, a fire that made me realize I was fighting for more than simply a house. I was defending my future, my identity, and my dignity. This was the start of a war I couldn't back down from, no matter how lengthy or tough it would be. The days that followed were tense and frightening, and they blended together. As I strolled around the mansion, I could feel the memories of better times suffocating me from the walls that once held warmth and laughter. I felt more alone than ever as Leaf continued to distance himself and withdraw farther into himself. Each time I tried to talk to him, to reach out for support, he brushed me off, saying he needed time to think. I realized I couldn't wait for life support one evening as I sat by myself in the living room, gazing at the remains of the life I'd fought so hard to create. The idea of losing my house, my haven, was too much to handle. If I didn't act now, I risked losing everything. I grabbed my phone and called an attorney. I inhaled deeply and replied, "Hello, this is Caitlin," when he answered. "I need help with the property situation." My voice shook slightly, but I studied myself, determined to push through the lawyer. Mr. Vander paid close attention as I described the circumstances. He spoke with a quiet power that I found comforting, and he seemed composed and confident. "You seem to have a good case, Caitlin," he replied. "Start gathering all the papers you have, the will, property, deeds, everything that indicates your ownership. We must move quickly to stop them from attempting to permanently seize control with their newly discovered resolve." For the following 3 days, I gathered as much as I could. I gathered the property deeds, my parents' will, and any other records attesting to my legitimate ownership. I meticulously chronicled the confrontation, capturing each statement, each threat, every detail that may support my case. I felt as though I was building a shield with each document and piece of evidence, readying myself for the fight that was ahead. I knew deep down that this was only the beginning, but I was prepared to fight. I had another meeting with Mr. Vander. "We may request a restraining order against them to stop any more harassment," he informed me gently. "Establishing your legal claims to the property is crucial." His self-assurance made me feel strong and in control. I consented to proceed. Leif was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands when I got home later that night. I inhaled deeply, preparing for what I knew would be a challenging discussion. "We must speak, Leif." I spoke firmly but softly. Your family will be the target of my legal action." His eyes widened in surprise as he raised his head. "Don't do this, Caitlin. It will simply exacerbate the situation. They're attempting to take my house, Leaf. I can't let it happen by doing nothing," I answered, my annoyance showing. He looked aside and shook his head. "My mother, you don't get it. Crossing her is not something you want to do. She is going to ruin your life. She's done so already." I spoke as my heart raced with a mixture of pain and rage. "This is my life, Leaf. You should be on my side." With a start, he jumped up and raked his hands through his hair. "All I need is some time to reflect. I am being pushed away by you." A profound sense of betrayal swept over me as I watched him struggle. In this battle, I felt completely alone. "I'm at my breaking point. I have to stick up for myself," I remarked, my voice low but firm. Then Leaf turned and left, leaving me with a terrible sense of determination and failure. Something changed inside of me at that very instant. I sensed a glimmer of strength rather than hopelessness. I had to be my own advocate since no one else would fight for my rights. The next week, I applied for a restraining order against Leora, Zaria, and Dorian. After a court date was established, I spent hours reviewing my notes, preparing my case, and psychologically preparing for the days that were ahead. I was certain that this hearing would be a turning point in my life. I showed up to the courthouse on the day of the hearing. Wearing my finest suit, my heart was racing in my chest. I wanted to appear more confident than I actually felt as I walked into the courtroom. I spotted Leaf seated with his family, their faces a combination of fury and disdain. I sucked in a calming breath. I felt the pressure of my choice as I made my way to my side of the courtroom. The proceedings started as soon as the judge arrived. I stepped up and stated my case, explaining the invasion of my house and the threats that had been made against me. When I was done talking, I looked at Leaf, looking for even a glimmer of encouragement in his expression. However, his expression remained unwavering, a wall of indifference. That website only made me more determined. A house was no longer the only issue in this conflict. It was about taking charge of my life, claiming my identity, and maintaining my dignity. I felt a flood of relief when the court decided in my favor and issued the restraining order. I had made a stand, and it felt powerful. As I exited the courthouse, I knew that I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I was prepared to defend my future, my life, and my house. I was aware that this was just the beginning, even with the triumph. Leaf and his family would not be amenable to this decision, so I would still have to deal with them. Leaf was avoiding me more than ever, and the stress at home was evident. He appeared confused, divided between his allegiance to me and his family. Even though it was painful to see him so far away, I had made the decision to not back down. I was sitting by myself one evening when I heard someone knock on the door. I nervously scanned the crowd as my heart skipped a beat. Leaf was there, looking nervous and unkempt. Asking Leaf in a steady voice, I opened the door. "What are you looking for?" He entered and looked around anxiously. He said in a serious tone, "We need to talk." "What is it about?" "Your family's most recent plot," I replied, crossing my arms. "I'm trying to figure out what's happening, Caitlin." His eyes begged as he spoke. "Mom is upset. She said that she would stop at nothing to obtain this mansion." I inhaled deeply. "I'm having trouble staying calm. This is my home, Leif. I will not allow them to take it away from me. I want you to realize that." His expression was conflicted as he looked down. He was clearly under stress, but I doubted that he would ever support me. Deep down, this battle was altering everything between us. I was starting to realize that I could be waging this war by myself. In that moment, I knew I couldn't rely on anybody except myself. I was prepared for the journey ahead, knowing it would be long and hard. However, I also had a renewed sense of power and resolve that informed me that I was prepared to take back my life at whatever cost. "You must join me in standing." "Not them." My voice broke with hurt and frustration as I spoke. "I don't know if I can do that," Leif said, looking down and trembling as he spoke. "You're not aware of her full potential." "What made you marry me then?" I fired back. I feel anger rising within of me. "We seemed like a team to me. I believed that you loved me." His head hung, clearly torn. "Family is everything to me." Even though I do love you, Caitlin, I cannot simply ignore them. I felt a sudden, sharp pain of betrayal. So you'll pick them instead of me? In light of everything that has transpired, I inquired, waiting for his answer with a broken heart. Prior to his uttering another word, a thunderous bang outside interrupted the tense calm. Lyra, Ariel, and Dorian were standing on the front yard, talking fiercely with a bunch of movers when we hurried to the window. When I realized they were attempting to bring their belongings into my house, my heart fell. Utterly disregarding the restraining order, they're breaching the law. Leaf, I yelled, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. The police must be called. No, don't do it, he answered in a hurry. There was a hint of panic in his voice. It will simply exacerbate the situation. Even worse than this? I insisted, unable to believe what I was hearing. They are attempting to occupy my home. As I reached for my phone, Leaf grabbed my arm, his grip solid but urgent. Just give me a minute, Caitlin, so I can speak with them. I hesitated. I'm torn between wanting to end this nightmare once and letting Leaf handle it. However, I had finished waiting. Leif, stop talking. This finishes now. I steadied my hand and punched in 911. As I described the scenario to the operator, my heart was racing. They told me there will be assistance soon. As I hung up, I looked outside to find Leif's family still fussing with the movers. Their cheeks were crimson with resolve and rage. I went out onto the porch, feeling a wave of adrenaline as I yelled, "You are not wanted here! Get off my property!" Lyra turned, rage pouring in her eyes. "You think you can just toss us out? We also call this place home." Her voice was brimming with disdain as she spat. I felt a weird mixture of relief and worry when the sound of sirens suddenly filled the air. The tension was high, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that this argument might get out of hand, even though I was at last taking a stand. I was prepared to give an explanation when the cops showed up. Leaf stood aside and said nothing, clearly divided between his allegiance to me and his family. Officers. They're violating a restraining order. I gestured to my in-laws. They are attempting to occupy my house. The cops moved in, surveying the chaotic scene. "Ma'am, do you have documentation for the restraining order?" One of them turned to face me. I nodded immediately, rushing inside to get the documents as I handed them over. I looked across at Leaf. His expression was a mixture of remorse and anxiety, and I realized that this was a turning point in our relationship as well as for me. Lyra, Ariel, and Dorian persisted in their protests as the cops started talking to them. Anger and indignation permeated their shouts. Meanwhile, I stood to the side. My heart is pounding. My future as a whole was on the line. One of the officers came over to me after a heated argument. "Ma'am, we need to inform you that your restraining order is valid. Your in-laws cannot be on your property," he stated forcefully. "We'll request their departure, and we will do more if they don't want to." I felt a sense of relief, but the seriousness of the issue soon overcame it. It was going to be difficult for Lyra, Ariel, and Dorian to leave. As the cops took them off the premises, they looked at me, their features contorted with rage. Lyra turned back, spite in her voice. "Caitlin, you haven't seen the last of us. It's not over yet." I took a deep breath, keeping my stance, refusing to let their threats disturb me. As I watched them go, I understood that although this fight was far from over, I had finally gained the upper hand. The days of waiting for someone to save me were over. I was protecting myself. Leif stood off to the side, motionless and conflicted, watching his family depart under police escort for the first time. I thought I really grasped what was ahead. Even if it meant going it alone, I would have to fight for my future, my home, and my peace. As the authorities led my in-laws off the premises, I could tell that they were furious, especially Lyra's. "This isn't over, Caitlin," she yelled as she turned around. "Do you really believe you can simply take everything away from us? This is something you'll regret." I was shivering, but I wasn't going to be intimidated. I kept my eyes fixed on her. "I've had enough of you already. This is my home, and you will not take it away." Finally, the cops managed to clear the area and Lyra, Ariel, and Dorian were compelled to flee when the dust cleared. As I took a deep, calming breath, I experienced a strong wave of triumph. For the first time in weeks, I had a real feeling of liberation. I had stood up for myself. Leaf was standing close to the porch when I turned to face him, his look a mix of relief, remorse, and perplexity. He shook his head and ran a hand through his hair. "I can't believe this occurred," he murmured. "I never imagined my family would go this far." I moved in closer, looking into his face. "I want you to grasp something, Leaf. I fought for this home because it's mine. I cannot continue to live in constant fear of your family." "I understand," he said in a regretful tone. "I should have stood by you. All I felt was fear." "What are you afraid of?" "The rage of your family," I asked, feeling the weight of our entire ordeal pressing on me. "They're the ones who chose to infiltrate our lives and jeopardize our future. I'm worthy of better." He nodded, and his face softened. "Caitlin," he murmured softly, "I want to help you. However, I also don't want to lose my family." With composure and resolve, I met his gaze. "When your relatives decided to assault me and endanger my house, they made their own decision. You need to select me now, Leafy." His face changed after a brief period of strife. He took a long breath and nodded, his resolve evident. "You're right. I can't let them control my life or ours anymore. I'm with you." I felt as though a burden had been lifted when I heard those words. For the first time, I believed that if we were both dedicated to making it work, we could rebuild, even though I knew we had a long road ahead. In the next weeks, I worked on restoring the home to its former magnificence. I hired contractors to fix the damage, and with each improvement, I felt a fresh sense of purpose. I turned the house into a haven room by room, a testament to my fortitude and resiliency. I also started to get back in touch with Leif. With his family, he shared aspirations, made plans for the future, and learned how to establish limits. I discovered that my independence was a strength during this process. Leif, meantime, learned how to defend our shared life. I stood in the living room on the day the renovations were finally finished, admiring the lovely, serene area we had created. It seemed like a new beginning. I was no longer a betrayed person. I was a lady who had taken back her house, fought back, and found her identity again. That evening, a profound sensation of calm descended upon me as I watched the sunset from the porch. I had recreated a life I could be proud of, turned betrayal into empowerment, and converted suffering into strength. Once a battlefield, this house has transformed into my haven and a reflection of my journey from darkness to light. I was prepared for everything that may happen, being aware that I may influence my own fate